أولا كنشكر جميع المساهمين في تنظيم هذا الملتقى الشيق جدا، وأشكر السي عبد القادر القنصل العام في مدينة نيويورك المغرب في نيويورك، علما أنني عشت في نيويورك 21 عام. كل ما هو نيويورك يكون قريب أكثر، هذا شوق المكان. وكنشكر السي عبد السلام اللي واحد المجهود كبير بزاف، خصوصا ان مصطفى الأزموري كما قال الجميع اصبح تحفه اكاديميه، ولو ان مازال خصنا نشتغلوا من اجل تطوير الدراسات حول مصطفى الأزموري. انا كنتاسف بزاف انني ما تاحش ليا ما سعفش ليا الوقت باش نحضر البارح. كنت غنتعلم بزاف على مصطفى الأزموري. I switched to English. I just for those who don't speak Arabic, I missed yesterday's panels, and they would have been extremely interesting for me because I'm actually, for me, this is a coming back. My experience with Mustafa Azmouri, as Stan said, was an accident, pure accident. I was actually part of one of the professors teaching this course called Introduction to American Studies between 2002 and 2010. So of course, and we have a lot of narratives at that moment. The context was defamiliarizing history. This is what is beautiful and fascinating about American academia. Elsewhere it takes time before you come to understand how the world is, how the modern world is shaped. So, and we're of course teaching Cabeza de Vaca's text, and ستيبانيكو didn't give me any clues, of course. This is not a name that reminds you of anything. This is a name given by the slave owner. That's the problem with names, like most of the slaves have. The names have to be erased because this is killing the memory, so they have absolutely no idea who they are, even in terms of naming. This is a way of really disconnecting them from origins. So, and then I saw what helped me actually be curious is the fact that when he says Azmor, of course I said this man, of course, might be or is Moroccan. And then I started doing research, and I found out exactly that he came from Morocco and from Azmor. So look, now we are here in the city where he came from, celebrating this great figure. And this makes me think, actually, when I think about Azmor, Mustapha Azmori's story is about exploration, and for me, even just watching the film is some sort of exploration. And as the representative of the US consulate in Morocco says, survival, diversity, all these key words now that became part of in my field we call it post-colonial identity, or modern identity in general. Azmori makes us even explore his own city where not just America. Here we are, all of a sudden we're thinking about this beautiful city, and we're going to do a lot of things as I hear from my friends. So this is a story that is going to remain open. And this reminds me also, like sometimes we always say, I came from this and that, but we, and the Sa'ud is going to agree with me, there are certain places on earth, in the world, they exist because of the writers, or people who made them possible. I mean, nobody cares about La Mancha until Cervantes came and wrote Don Quixote de la Mancha. Also, James Joyce, Dubliners. These are actually, this is fictional art in general, producing space or giving birth to a certain space. There's Achebe, and most of us in Africa, people know the Igbo village in Nigeria thanks to Achebe, and many other examples you could cite actually. So now Azmor is thanks to Mustafa, even if when he left he had absolutely no relationship. This is actually one of the dilemmas of the diaspora. Azmor, thanks to him, is now going to be entering in a new dynamic. So I said that my encounter with Azmor was an accident. the first, and then in the US at Yale. And then when I came back to Morocco, I tried to, like anybody who's excited about discovering something that nobody else knows. And of course, I have to say that after I see all these impressive lists talking about Azmori, I said I have to stop talking of myself as an expert. Why? Because as I've said, my career switched into different, I never thought really that I would become a parliamentarian, neither a diplomat. This just happened when I came back to Morocco, this beautiful country that we never know what to expect. So, but when and then I wrote a piece, I remember, for the جريدة المساء. And I remember that I talked to the director of the newspaper, and he says, مختار, هذا مكتشف مستكشف مغربي في القرن السادس عشر. قلت له بيان سور. قال لي نو، يضحكوا علينا، ما نقدروش نمشيو شي قصة، ربما هذا الشيء غير. He says that this is a joke. Is this true? I have to convince him and show him documents. But this gives you an idea why we don't believe easily in the accomplishments of our ancestors. This is actually this kind of marginalized position in which we are born, or the post-colonial world, or African world is born. And then later, when I was a member of the committee that was thinking about CCM, the Moroccans, the Council on Moroccans Living Abroad. I talked to Sidi Zemi at the time, we were trying, and then we were competing. Who is going to be the first Moroccan living abroad on the list? Of course, I put Zmouri, because I had an argument. And then somebody else says, no, we're going to put Ibn Battuta. Because he, in terms of dates, he, in the 14th century, came before. And then I had to find an argument. Why Zmouri? And I still made my case. And it was approved. I said, there is a big difference. Ibn Battuta does not really symbolize le Marocain du monde, which is a diasporic phenomenon. Ibn Battuta was in the Indian Ocean, just sort of a traveler, a hala, and he was a diplomat. He didn't go through that process of survival. One. Two, when you think about the diaspora, it's not just like going and coming back. That's really a comfortable position. Diaspora is like Azmori. He left his country and never came back. Right? He embodies this whole transatlantic tragedy of what we call in African American literature or writing in general as the Middle Passage. You know? So Azmori is also the ethics, the work ethics. That's what the diaspora is about. When you are migrant or migration, when you go there, you have to prove yourself. Race is against you, geography is against you, language is against you. So there are so many questions. As you can see now, I am not using Zmouri to really go deeper, because you are experts and I am no longer an expert of Zmouri, but I use him now. Like توظيف مصطفى الزمور في سياقات عديدة. And I use him today in this context. Why all of a sudden in Morocco, as you know, the Atlantic became a fashionable topic, thanks to His Majesty's initiative for Afro-Atlantic cooperation. Right? On this side. On the other side, there's also the US Atlantic Partnership. So these are great initiatives that really sort of give us the context. And sometimes the context gives us more ideas about how the world should be seen, defined. So this is what I can tell. And I missed yesterday's conference. I would have asked actually a question, which is directly which falls directly in the scope of my work. You see, the title of the conference, as you put it, is مصطفى الزموري جسر متوسطي ثقافي, like the cultural bridge, Mediterranean. So I'm curious, really, why is Zmouri a Mediterranean bridge and not Atlantic? Or, even for me, when I look at Zmouri, I look at his. When you talk about his, we talk about captivity. Here, Portuguese captured him, and then Spanish bought him as a slave. So his exploration, or his success story is an Atlantic story more than the Mediterranean. But this is not as easy as I put it, because this gives me other questions. Is it possible to think about the Atlantic as a bridge? Because it has never been imagined so. The Mediterranean, we grew up in Morocco, identifying ourselves as Mediterraneans. The Atlantic, even if we have more than 3,000 kilometers along the coast, we don't really look at it. We don't consider it as a component of our identity. And the arguments I make in this kind of, one of the central ideas that I work actually in the Center of Atlantic Studies that I'm working on is to push for this idea that the Atlantic component of Moroccan identity is as interesting as the Mediterranean. In fact, I even argue that Moroccan leadership and Moroccan history is much more present in the Atlantic than in the Mediterranean. I don't know if I'm wrong, but I mean, this needs, of course, a lot of discussion in the future. But coming back to the question, is the Atlantic a bridge or a border? When I get to 10 minutes to huh? 5 minutes. No, but left. That's all I have left. Oh my goodness. You see? Okay, so I'm going to quickly. Sorry. We need to think about these things, and Mr. Azmor, I use him as the first story, and then we need to think about what that first means. Why? I mean, it's not us. I remember when I went to Kenya, when I said I'm African, they would just look at me, you are African, North Africans are not Africans. And then I had to take a text from one of the writers in the US saying Mustapha Azmori is the first African who got to the New World. And I said, how come that you recognize this guy as African and not me? So you can see this whole of claiming originality, because you are reacting against a backdrop, implicitly or explicitly. Okay, and then the second story that I use as the foundational story to argue that, to talk or to show Morocco's foundational role in the Atlantic is the US, the Moroccan recognition of the US independence. This is the first again. I mean, we have so many firsts when we'll talk about Moroccan role in the Atlantic. But the question, and sometimes we all brag about it, oh, Morocco is the first, but we have to really go into interpretation. What does that mean? For me, it means like the Sultan Sidi Muhammad Abdullah, whom I call the first Atlanticist. He really turned like his attention to the sea, even if we're always accused by colonial history, especially in Europe and France, that les Africains ont tourné le dos à la mer. They turned their back to the sea because they don't want to see what happened before. So, Sidi Muhammad Abdullah, when he recognized this brave gesture of his representing the monarchy of Morocco, the Sultan Alawi, going against another monarchy, which is one of the greatest countries of that time. I mean, this great gesture to recognize a republic. So these are the paradoxes that we need to work about. And Sidi Muhammad Abdullah is the first to bring diplomacy into the New World. Otherwise, conflicts were resolved by, as you know, weapons, by violence. So this is also another case for conflict resolution. And also, there are people talking about how the recognition of, especially around the 1780s with John Adams, etc., that Moroccan's recognition inspired many liberation movements across South America. This is also an interesting case. So this is where I put. And where does this come from? The city of Soweto. This is my second story. I don't have time to elaborate, but in the future, of course. The third story is even more fascinating for me, because I just sort of, I didn't have the chance to work on these stories, because you know what I did from politics to diplomacy, and now I'm coming back. So I'm trying to actually resume my work on this story. The third story is a Jewish-Moroccan story, another success story, and the guy is called David Ben-Yuli, who is actually the first, there is another first, the first senator of non-European Christian origins to arrive to become a successful politician. Senator of Florida representing Florida for 2 terms, before the Civil War and after the Civil War, right? How do I read this? I read this as the first, this Moroccan Jewish from Essaouira, the first American of non-European origins to shatter the classical definition of the American dream, because he opened the American dream to other ethnic groups, Jews in this case. And success stories can also be this. What do these stories tell me? Actually, they help me find some sort of a context for the Royal Initiative for African Cooperation. This is actually the first initiative, again, that calls for cooperation across the Atlantic. We can talk about NATO. NATO was interested in political alliance, not in regional cooperation. That's their interest during the Cold War. And Africa, the first also initiative to be ocean-based. It uses the Atlantic to look at Africa. And we can reverse the logic, saying we can use Africa to look at the Atlantic. This is actually another interesting point of view that I want to really sort of elaborate on. What does it mean? Because the classical logic is that the Atlantic world defines the whole region, right? So Africa has no presence in silence. If you go to African American history, why the African Americans were absent, invisible. When you read de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, we even talk about Hegel, what he says about the New World. It's just a pure extension of the New World, of the Old World. So we use this dichotomy, regenerative dichotomy as I call it, like the Old World and the New World. Where does it come from? How come that Africa is not in that Old World? And Hussein, you are going to correct me, even if Africa is considered the oldest continent and the origin of humanity. Why it's not in that old? So you see here, or new, how come that the African Americans are invisible? And now they reach 160, 170 million in the New World. And they insist on having this hyphenated identity of African Americans. Not for no reason, which means there is still attachment to the land of origins. And the initiative, the Royal Initiative, is the first to actually sort of transfer or transform the angle from which we have to look at the Atlantic. And these kinds of stories, Maury of Cognition, David Bourguignon and others, there are many other actually African who were enslaved coming from Mali and Nigeria, they always claim that they actually have some sort of religious affiliation with Morocco, like Omar Syed. There are many names. These are the stories that that help us, because sometimes what academia does is give legitimacy to initiatives. Because politics are a little bit suspicious. And culture, you put it in the title. What is beautiful about culture? Culture unifies. Even in the most difficult situation, while politics divide, that's the problem. Mustapha Zumuri, and this is something that I said, I don't know if it was said yesterday, Mustapha Zumuri is a bridge, an Atlantic bridge I have to claim, not just Mediterranean. Why? Because he combines, or around him there are 3 or 4 cultural traditions. The first one is his origins, Azmor and Morocco. And we never know. The problem with Maury is that he never wrote his story. So we have to really deepen our interpretation of things that are written on him. And this is actually the dilemma of the whole post-colonial people. They didn't write, and they didn't represent themselves, so they have to be represented. And this is something that, which means that we have no chance, but we have no choice, I want to say, just like to have a critical reading, like Abisa Boubacar, and now that is translated by my friend Sergio Cardel. So, Zemmour, as I said, is his central gravity for identity. Why? He embodies the Portuguese who captured him, the Spanish tradition, where he was enslaved, the New World, of course, his origins, as I said, and then, as the film beautifully shows, the documentary beautifully shows, Native Americans. This is something completely new. We are going to see the first explorer, because we trying to actually have some sort of a game with Europeans who claim that who claim Euro-America, as we say, who claim the bridge. I mean, I talked about bridges. borders, of course, the rest of the Atlantic region. When you come to Europe, of course, there was a bridge. Euro-America. Hegel counts that this is a beginning, which means, not count, like John Locke started, America is the beginning, which means what? Which means that Europe has a second chance to be born again. This is whole theme of order new. Azmor, who's said before me, is a diplomat. He performed so many roles, right? And also the first one, unless there's something else, to be curious about Native American languages. So why? Is it, as my friend from the US Council has said, the language of survival? If you don't speak the language, you'll die. This is the language of the diaspora too, about integration, right? Why is he the first one to really care? At that time, there is this kind of superiority of race or whatever it is, that nobody cares. Is it his difference? The fact that he was discriminated against that made him curious about people who might be sharing with him that position of marginality. So all these questions, actually, I want to develop in the future, but I want also to claim that people who says that les Marocains, les Africains ont tourné le dos à la mer, this is completely wrong. Those, and this is why I also find the initiative important, because it covers the exact same space from which 12 to 14 million enslaved Africans were shipped and transported or exported to the New World between 16th and 19th century. And right after them, colonialism came from the same Atlantic powers. So you can see, you can think about these kind of issues and how the Atlantic was dominated, marginalized, and now, of course, and I will just think about Du Bois now. Everything is coming out. Du Bois tells us that it's impossible to imagine anything that happened in the New World without seeing the contribution, the outstanding contribution of African Americans, of Africa, industrial, agricultural, cultural, all these things. They were not acknowledged as such because always the slave always believed that the slave, his mentality, his work is his own property. That's actually the big problem now when you go back to history. So this is about time to really think, rethink, rewrite, and correct. Why? Because we want to create, or want to prepare, to pave the way for the generations of tomorrow so there is no anger. When expiation is a goal, we need to really sort of address and open the Pandora box and address our problems. We are all humans. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're going to have a very short translation of this speech.